Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Skinner, founder of MarketingKind, and welcome to this MarketingKind exchange, in which we'll explore how corporate anthropology can help us navigate these tricky times with our special guest, Jitske Kramer. Jitske applies the knowledge and skills of cultural anthropology to the business world and beyond, traveling widely, learning from leaders, traditional healers, surprising innovators, and even the occasional random passerby, translating insights from context to context to help us reimagine how best to live, work, lead organizations, and even participate in a thriving democracy. As well as having appeared in numerous documentaries, Jitske has written 9 best-selling books, including Jam Cultures, Deep Democracy, Building Tribes, and The Corporate Tribe, which won the prestigious Management Book of the Year award. Her latest book is called Tricky Times, Navigating the Messy Middle of Change. Robert Cialdini, the great persuader, has written that in times of relentless uncertainty, one thing is certain, that we need this book. I met Jitske in Lithuania, where we were both speaking at a conference, and she kindly dedicated a copy of Tricky Times to me with the inscription Safe Travels. Now, at first glance, I remember wondering if that was an oblique reference to the fact that Russia is believed to scramble the GPS signals of flights in and out of the Baltic. But after a moment of consideration and then seeing the phrase cropping up repeatedly in Jitske's writings, I came to believe it might mean something more than that. We are collectively on a journey of change, as Tony Juniper in our last exchange and others are increasingly arguing, from one world order to something new that we don't yet fully grasp. Leading our lives and the activities and organizations we are responsible for through that level of change puts us on among the trickiest of terrains. Now, the trickier the terrain, the better the guide that we would wish to seek. So on that note, Jitske, welcome to MarketingKind. What does the message Safe Travels mean to you?
Well, I think we all travel or journey through life. I hope we do it in a safe way. So it's what I usually say, safe travels to my kids when they go out, to myself and to everyone I meet. And I meet people along the way. So I'm very happy that we meet again along our journeys where we're finding out how to organize ourselves in the world and hopefully in a good way.
Yeah, so I wanted to start by diving a little bit into the anthropology part of your background and perspective, and to get a sense of what the anthropological perspective on the world is. If we think of marketing at a headline level, for example, you can describe it as a department in an organization alongside finance and HR, but you can also think of marketing as a narrative-based discipline alongside other narrative-based disciplines like history or fiction. And the particular characteristic of marketing narratives is that they often have a value exchange at the heart of them, often an economic one. What is the unique perspective of anthropology on the world, and how might that be different, for example, to social psychology or sociology or cultural studies or other social sciences?
Good question. Yeah, it's a social science. So we look at like the wisdom of people, anthropology. Um, and our main focus is what happens between people. So a psychologist will see what is happening within one person, the psychology of a person. And anthropology, it's similar to sociology. We tend to understand what's going on between people. And I'm a social or cultural anthropologist by study. So how do people shape cultures? How do cultures shape people? That's my main focus. And there is a distinction with sociology where anthropologists tend to do field work, so participatory observation. We go somewhere, we see, and we use ourselves as the observer. Then the negative connotation to that, or what people would say, but that's very subjective because you take yourself. And I think most anthropologists are very aware how subjective they are. That's why they start all their research reports about telling about themselves, saying that all the others are also very subjective, but not saying it and not calling it out. So even if you write a questionnaire, or you put questions out, you select the questions. So there's a subjectivity in it. So it's never objective. So we try to understand how people experience the world themselves. So we call it an emic point of view, from the inside out. And then ethic would be looking at it from the outside with a judgment or a comparison or anything. And we're very sharp on, okay, is it something that people say themselves and how they experience the world, the religion, the differences, how they do leadership? Or is it a template, from the outsider looking at a culture? So anthropology is really about, to me, it's really about how people shape cultures and how cultures shape people. And yeah.
Well, yeah, we're all used to, for example, changing the way that we look at something when we watch a play or a film. So we know how to suspend our disbelief. We can watch a play or a film and know that it's not real, but at the same time watch it as if it were real, but from a position of safety. Is there anything we can do as non-anthropologists to sort of put on a pair of anthropological glasses or train those muscles so that we can understand the interactions between people through more of an anthropological lens, or have more of a more natural instinct for the kind of insights that emerge from that?
Yeah, I love the saying in anthropology is that anthropologists try to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. So everything which is familiar to you, where you think, yeah, sure, then there should be a question mark there. Why? And if you take a closer look, it's really strange you do it that way. And everything you feel is strange, where you have some kind of judgment, you, when you have a closer look, you probably recognize yourself in that. So anthropologists are in a constant state of wonderment and confusion. Um, and I think we can train that. So as one of route is very easy. When you encounter a person who's different from you, you will be surprised either because you're positive, like, wow, that's a really good leader, that's a norm, and that norm reflects you and not the other person. So every time you have some type of judgment, negative or positive, it tells you something about you and not necessarily about the others. So really immersing yourself in another situation or culture means that you first meet yourself and then you can meet the other, and be very explicit about that. So for my book, I did research among different places, but also in Togo with voodoo priests. Now, if I say the word voodoo, then I'm sure that you all have, ideas,
Mm.
judgments, either, filled in by Hollywood movies, dolls and needles and all that. That's not how a voodoo priest in Togo would describe his own religion or her own religion. Um, so it's interesting to go and travel and to meet voodoo priests and to really understand their story and their storyline without all the ideas I have or the judgments or the scary things I have in my mind about their reality, but just step into their shoes and try to experience the world as they do. And yeah, that's anthropology. And I do that, in Togo or in the jungle in Indonesia, but also when I meet a corporate or another type of organization, a school or a healthcare system. Like, okay, so how do people experience the world through their lens? And then you'll see that the board is different than, for the teachers in a school, for instance. And then usually we tend to think, okay, what's the right story? Who's got it right? They all have it right. They have just different stories. So all the stories together
Mm.
is their collective view. So it's really listening to all the different voices, trying to find the pattern which
Mhm.
binds those different storylines, and that creates that, or that is the culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember once hearing the advice given to fiction writers that they should write their bad guys not as people who think that they're the bad guy, but as people who believe themselves
Mm.
the hero of a different story. And I think that anthropological perspective, I remember once coming across, an anthropologist saying, from an anthropological perspective, somebody's crossing their fingers like this. The objective description doesn't really make any sense. You need to know inside, is
Yeah.
this good luck or is this, I don't mean it? which are both things that can be indicated by that. And of course, there is potential for the organizational world, the business world, to better understand customers in their own terms rather than through the lens of questionnaires that really filter things that are not their priorities. Or in organizational life more broadly, I think in healthcare, for example, I think patient-centric approaches. I guess most anthropologists are not studying the business world. And certainly most people in the business world don't have a background in anthropology. So what, in your experience, is key to being the lamp at the door between those different worlds?
The what? The lamp of
The
the
lamp
door.
at the door. What's key to bringing together the knowledge of anthropology with the world of business and
Ah,
making that a successful mixture?
that we take each other serious. That's the start. And that sounds obvious, but it's not. Because if I say I'm an anthropologist, then, the rank is not very high in many places. So a psychologist, then that's worth more. But if you're an engineer, that's really something. So it's really about how to make sure that we can hear each other. In some cases, I call myself a behavioral engineer. That helps. So to juggling with the language a little bit. And understanding that, so for me as an anthropologist entering somewhere, it's really making sure that it's not about somewhere far away or some exotic thing. It's the understanding that everywhere, doesn't matter where, people get together in an organization, a family, a community, and as soon as Homo sapiens get together, they start creating cultures. So my field of knowledge is about how people shape cultures, and just now online there is this culture. You're all there, you got everyone's got their mic on mute. That's a culture. There was a unwritten rule, maybe it's written, I don't know, but we kind of figured it out that that's a good thing to do. There's people who have their cameras on and off, and we kind of are okay with that. So there is unwritten rules, so we have ways to be together. And as soon as people understand that, also in organizations, then it's not something, culture is not something you do when you have time on Friday afternoon with a drink and some music. It's not something you can, delegate to HR and they do a culture program with some nice experiments, or you can give to the communication department where they create culture values and they put it on mouse mats and then we're good. No, it's the core of what we do, because we shape those cultures every day in every conversation and every decision we take. So it's part and parcel of leadership. And once we understand that, we can learn from each other. So then it's okay. So every time we have a conversation and interaction, we share ideas. And when we share ideas, we define this as good and bad, right and wrong, true and false. And then we take a decision. And the decision can be this is good behavior, bad behavior. That's a normative decision. But we can also decide, okay, knowing that we think this is very important, this is where we spend the money on, and this is where we don't spend money on. So then we shape the world accordingly. And then it becomes not a nice to have. It's the core of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And even just hearing the phrase human resources and thinking from an anthropological perspective,
Yeah.
it sounds, the story that it tells is borderline psychotic.
Yes.
And actually, that raises a really challenging question in that, when you talk about, the stories that guide us, that feels like an almost unstoppable force of human development. It's why we've developed rather than just evolved. We can pass on learning through those stories. And we were chatting just beforehand about Yuval Noah Harari and the role he's played in bringing to the front of everyone's attention how important the stories that we tell ourselves have been in shaping history. But when we get into the corporate world and you address the problems of our current economic model in tricky times, and in a sense, economics is almost based on the exclusion of the human story, because you have that assumption ceteris paribus, all other things being equal. So we just focus on growing the numbers as if it made no difference. And yet we've become hooked on that model, not only for consumerism, not only for our way of life, but increasingly in a more dangerous world, even dependent on that model for our very defense. So, when you have the sort of unstoppable force of human stories in anthropology, and you take on the world, sort of immovable object of economics and a model that we depend on that rejects so much of the story we'd want to, how do we resolve that tension? Does anthropology win and economics lose? Is it the other way around, or is there a new hybrid? Or how do we reconcile that tension?
Well, that's the whole storyline of the book, which is 400 pages. So it's hard to answer that in one answer. Um, but I don't think it's about winning or losing. It's understanding that economy is just a narrative. It's no law by nature. And it's not that if you put numbers to it and when you quantify things, it becomes more true. We are narrative people. So we create a narrative. And the idea that we put constant growth, that we have this obsession. So economic growth is again, it's something which we always have as human beings. We want to get more, we want to get more, wealth, and that's all good and for our kids. And so that's something which been with us. But the obsession that regardless what, the economy must grow and we must feed that beast, that's new. And then there is a couple of things which got attached to that. So we put that in the center of things. And there are cultures which don't put that in the center of things, even nowadays. So I was in the jungle in Indonesia last year for a documentary. And there they don't have economic growth as the main thing. The main thing is that you have to be a beautiful, nice person. Because if not, your spirit, which will go out walking every night, if you're not a nice person, in the morning it might not come back. And if it doesn't come back, you fall ill. And if it doesn't come back at all, you die. So make sure that you're beautiful. And every time that you're in a quarrel with someone, you don't go to sleep because the spirits might, be upset at night and then they will damage you. So the main thing is make sure you're a good, beautiful person. That's a different core value. And it shapes the world differently. So it's just to say that it's not about what is, better or worse. It's about understanding that it's a choice. So nothing is meaning of itself. And we created the idea that we have to constantly grow our economics. And doing that, we kind of forgot that the world has limits. So it's a limitless growth in a situation where there is limits to the world in terms of things, can finish. People die and they get tired. We cannot constantly be active. So that's where it started. And if I then give a very brief lesson on how people shape cultures to help you in this anthropological lens, the brief lesson is nothing is meaning of itself. We have to create meaning together. And in doing that, we say this is valuable and this is not. So those are the values. And if we think things are valuable, then we should act on it. So those are the behaviors. And we should do that as a group collectively. So those are the norms. So we grow norms to make sure we all act in a certain way because we think that is valuable. And those norms, some of them are very explicit. We put them, in the law. And if you break them, you go to prison, you get fired. But others are not that explicit, but very implicit, but very important because the groups make it very clear that if you don't, if you break the norms, then we'll hiss and, that's group pressure. And if you think about that, that's our narrative. So the values we have, the behaviors and the norms, that's what we believe in. That's our belief system. And not only for our individual point of view, but the whole group. And the whole group thinks this is good. So what the other groups are doing, that must be bad because this is right. So that must be wrong. And that's where culture clash happens. Now, if I have that narrative, that's that's my worldview, and that will guide me how I solidify that in the physical world. So where I spend my money on, how I shape, the cities, how I deal with nature, the systems, the structures, that's shaped by what we believe is true. So if we believe that a core value is obsession with economic growth,
Mm.
then the question is, what type of behavior do we stimulate? Well, if you think about this, culture shaping ABC, then you make sure that you put emphasis on the type of behavior that will constantly play with boundaries and limits. Fake it till you make it. The sky is the limit. But that is a problem when you think that the actual physical world does have boundaries. And we created this type of narrative in a moment of time when no one thought that, clear water could be gone, or that, resources could be finished. And that's the realization where we kind of created this party where we could do anything. And then suddenly we look around and we say, whoa, oh, we made a mess of this.
Mm.
And we realized that not everyone was invited to the party. So there's people, the neighbors are standing outside and say, well, we didn't like the party from the beginning because it's based on exclusion. It's based on putting people down, and you misuse people and our resources. So that's where we are now after a few decades of limitless growth, realizing that the world is limited. And in that process, we created a couple of things which are adding on why it's such a special time, because we left the gold standard. What was it in the 70s, I think, 60s, 70s. So we created a limitless space where we can create money. And then there was globalization. So that's also limitless because we didn't have multinationals before the 90s. So we started growing that. So every time we want to say to a company that, well, you have to apply this law, then they say, oh, then we go. So there is kind of limitless there bound. And then we got the internet, 80s, 90s, 2000s, where you can create a story which can be different every day. And we have this myth that this is about, free speech.
Mm.
But we know it's not free speech. It's a whole minefield of algorithms, which is power. And then we've got AI, and that's where we can play with reality to the max. Now, this is, I think, why the transformation we go through and why so many companies are trying to understand what's going on and how to deal with that, because it's a very, very deep transformation where we understand that our narratives, which we've been building on for the past decades, that, well, there's something wrong with it. And we start getting that, but it's very hard to find a new storyline.
I've read your book twice, and the last chapter is about the importance and the difficulty of admitting that we're lost as a point of departure. A couple of times I almost wondered why that wasn't the first chapter of the book in some ways. Why is it so difficult and so important to admit that we're lost? Because the message you've just given, I can't think of any senior business leader, charity leader, or politician who probably doesn't understand quite a bit of that. And yet there are not many that lead with that kind of analysis. It's something that's not spoken. Why is it so hard to admit we're lost?
Because we can lose a lot. So back to how people shape cultures. The ones who are very good at the behavior, which a group finds very important based on the values, those usually step into some kind of leadership. So they have what anthropologists call definition power. They have power to define the world. And with that power, which is great, but it comes with responsibilities and with privileges. So yeah, I can shape the world. I know how to, and I have interest in this world, either money wise because my pension is connected to it, or I benefit from it in some kind of way, and now we need to change it. And I don't know where that will lead to. So it's scary. And the process of going through change is always linked to what we call liminality, a
Yeah.
liminal space of not knowing, betwixt and between. And that's a phase people go through on an individual level, group level, societal level. So I think it's very easy to explain when we think about it on an individual level. So I think most people on this call or people listening later, you've been in some kind of relationship in your life. And we all experience that sometimes a relationship is great, and there's these moments you think, not so much. And maybe even to the point that you got to break a relationship. Now, let's assume that you've been with someone for 20 years and you got kids and your house and all the things you have to do, and you created a world around it, with friends. But somehow you understand that, somehow in the core narrative, it doesn't fit anymore. There's something wrong. And you need to make choices, and you need to change. So maybe you live in a city and you feel it doesn't fit. We need to move to the countryside. And by the way, my partner, it might have been good at one point in my life, but not anymore. So then imagine how easy it is it to have that conversation. It's very, very difficult. And as soon as I start talking about it, I cannot say, oh, I know I was joking. It's fine. It's good. So as soon as I phrase it, I put words to it, it becomes true. And I have to deal with it. And and if we recognize where we are, and if we recognize we are in a spot where we cannot longer be, it's all kinds of emotions pop up. It might be shameful. I might be afraid. But at the same time, I might be very joyful because now finally I can create something new. I can start a new life. And that mix of feelings,
Mm.
that's where liminality sits. And that's also where true transformation takes place. And that's where we need leadership. The only thing is that many leaders have benefits and interest in the old story.
Mm.
So it takes a lot of courage and strength to carry people through uncertainty to a space where things might fundamentally change. And if it's a small thing, if in your own life it's not about this whole big thing, the new house and a new partner, it's just a small thing. You got to move streets, or I don't know. Then it's like from A to B. It's not too big a change. But if it's really at the core, it's an identity crisis, because then I need to rethink who I am, and it's soul searching. Now, if an organization goes through those deep changes, or a society, you could say that you go through an identity crisis. And as in an individual life, we could say, well, I'm in a midlife crisis, and we all know that buying another motorbike doesn't do the trick, although it feels good. But we need to look fundamentally of where we're at, and I think that's what's going on in society as well.
Yeah, yeah, I wanted to dig in more because you mentioned the concept of liminality, and that's where the book does begin, really, with an ode to liminality. And I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the concept of liminality. It holds so much promise, and yet is so hard to pin down. So when I hear the word liminality, the first two things that occurred to me, first of all, one version of liminality. I remember Barack Obama opened his memoir with a description of his daily commute, which was a walk from the White House residence to the Oval Office. And he said that walk every morning, that moment in his own head, gave him the space to essentially line up his thoughts and know what his priorities were for the day, what success looked like, and that it was sort of sacred to him for that reason. And so there's a version of liminality which is about bridging to the next place, the next story. And then the other thought that occurred to me was the Canterbury Tales, the narrative poem, which is about a pilgrimage from London to Canterbury. Now, they don't, as it happens, ever arrive, And it doesn't matter, because what matters is they engage in a storytelling competition, and they tell each other stories, and those stories make the journey enjoyable. And so you've got one version of liminality, which is all about the end game that follows. And then another version of liminality, which says, well, actually, life doesn't have an end point, certainly not one that we choose. The best thing is to make the most of the journey. How do we use liminality to really actually get a grip on something and know what kind of liminality we're in, where the boundaries are, and what our priority should be? Should it be to fixate on creating the next story, or just enjoying what we can with what we have on the way there?
Well, the answer is yes. No, it's a combination. So how I, get it more concrete in my mind is if you look at your life, it's a constant different moments of liminality. So it's a constant transformation. But there are moments where somehow the narrative, settles down. So you grow older and then you become a teenager. There's a liminal phase there, and then somehow you grow into adulthood. And there's the moment where you say, okay, now I'm kind of get it. And then you might marry, and then something happens, and then you settle into that. So it's constant phases of uncertainty, not knowing, finding out, and then it settles. So in your life, you as an individual have different storylines, so to speak. So your job, your friends, the way you look, your how you think about yourself. Now, if there's a moment where one storyline is blocked because you feel that, my job doesn't longer any longer fit, but the rest is still okay, then you kind of have you know, you're doing fine. You just got to find a new job. And if that's really different, then that has a big impact. But if you come to the point that it's not only your job, but also, your hairstyle and your friends and your partner and where you live, then all storylines are tackled. And then it's a deeper transformation. And then suddenly you have liminality in all spaces. That's why we call it midlife crisis. So there is this, the thing is with liminality, it's almost more like describing the feeling of that phase. So it's not so much a timeline where you think, when does it stop? When does it end? It's describing the feeling that that what's usually was okay no longer is. So it feels very chaotic. And it creates spaces where you can create something new. Now, for me, the main thing is understanding that if we're in a space where we really want to transform something, we want to create something new as an individual or a group or society, we cannot skip this phase of not knowing and in between. It doesn't work. If we want to go from A to B, but we many times think, well, we are at A and how to get to B, and I have two dots and I need to connect them, and I find a timeline and I know how to do it and I've got control. That all sounds great, but it only works if someone's been at B, so we can define it. We know what it looks like. Then we can plan it accordingly. But if it's a transformation, then the only thing we do know that we can't stay where we are. And many times it's not very clear where B is, how long it will take, what it will look like. So if you translate that to individuals, like for me personally, about 20 years ago, I was really ill. So my body, stopped working. It didn't do what it should do. So then you become, enter liminal space where I wanted a dot on the horizon and someone give me a plan and KPIs and milestones and like that all would be well and better. But at that moment, that was not the case. We didn't know how long it would take, if it would have a good ending. The only thing I knew, well, what was no longer is, and who am I if I don't have my work? And so I needed leadership. I needed someone structuring my day. I needed someone to talk with to say, well, who am I? What's going on? And then you could say, well, when does it end? Well, I don't know. You could even argue that even if I would die, will it end? Depends on your view of life. So it's not about, when does it end, because it will continue, but when do I get kind of a grip, a new normal, a new balance with the situation? And in that, I need guidance, I need leadership. Leadership making sense of it. Culture is a sense making system, giving structures. And you see that in that leadership, we need chiefs, and we need leaders, and we need shamans. So that's for many people a big step, but I can explain it. So if you look at how different tribes in the world, cultures deal with transformation, the master of ceremony is the shaman. It's not the chief, it's the shaman. And in my culture, and I think for most of you here in the call as well, we might not think about shamans when we think, especially when we think about the business world, but we think about consultants, coaches, therapists, and they all guide this space, trying to make sense of things, and that's what we need. And when I was very ill, I had a coach, a therapist from the UK, John Casson, and John said to me in one of those dark moments which I had, he said, "You're at the place where your soul's being built. Now you go build it." And I think that's what liminality is about. It's a soul searching, soul building moment where you get try to understand, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Who am I? Who am I in relation to my work, to all the other stuff? And how do I shape my reality? Now, and I think that when the group goes through those transformations, we ask ourselves the same question. But in organizations, we call it mission, vision, strategy. But it's soul searching. It's, why am I here? What will happen if the company dies out? Would it be bad? And it's usually a company is not about, profit. Well, that helps. But if that's the main goal, then the soul is gone. So why are we here? What's the story? What do we bring to the world? And so therefore your question, will it ever stop? But that's not really the question. The question is, how do we relate to ourselves and the world around us? And do we have some kind of context where we feel, okay, this is how we should do stuff. This is good and bad, right and wrong, true and false. And if we have that, for that storyline, liminality is gone. We integrated new ideas, and but then something else will happen. So it will be there all the time in different abstract levels and different spaces. But there are moments in your life where you feel like, oh yeah, things are going well.
There's one group of people for whom it may be going too well in the current phase of liminality. And I'm thinking a little bit of trickster culture in terms of your book. I don't know any other corporate anthropologists, but in the UK, we do have a very distinguished financial journalist, Gillian Tett, who has a PhD in anthropology and wrote a book called Anthrovision. And she's written recently of the problem of normalizing deviance, whereby what we might think of as a trickster, I believe in your language, undermines norms and undermines culture in a way where the big problem isn't just what they do. It's that because we're exposed to it repeatedly, we end up not being as shocked by it. We end up thinking maybe that's okay, and it ends up degrading collective. So it's not just the trickster, it's our response to the trickster. Is there a way to avoid the normalization of deviance?
Well, the tricky thing is we need trickster energy to change.
Mm.
So it's it's not good or bad. We just need it. We just don't need too much of it. And we surely don't need tricksters as leaders.
Mm.
And that's where we go wrong. So if you look at the mythology and the stories of people around the world, in every story, in every myth, there will be trickster figures. And they should be. They make it fun. So Jack Sparrow is a modern trickster. Pippi Langkous, Pippi Langstrumpf. I don't know how you call that. like the Swedish girl, Pippi, with the, I don't
I
know how
would
you call
defer
it.
to one of our members, hopefully.
Yeah.
Long stocking.
Pippi Longstocking.
Longstocking,
Oh, very
thank
good.
you, Pippi
Thank you very much.
Longstocking. And then we, so Coyote. So in every story, there is a trickster figure. And we need those because they play with boundaries. And if there's no tricksters, nothing will change. So we need to invite them. They're cool. But they need to fight with the standing order. They need to fight with the leaders. So one example is Prometheus was a trickster god, a Greek god, and he stole the fire from the gods and gave it to people, to us. And that's why we have fire and we started our civilization and all that. So then the question is it good or bad what Prometheus did? It depends who you ask. So if you ask the leaders, then the gods, they say it's really bad. So they punished him. And so the thing is, the trickster plays with boundaries. And the role of a trickster in the storyline is that we, the listeners, we people, we can decide again, is it good or bad? So they sharpen our view. They help us understand, yes, this is morality. So this is good and bad. The trickster itself doesn't think about morality. They're outside the moral standards. So if you think about Pinocchio, he doesn't lie because it's strategically right to do so. He just does because he isn't a human being. He's just a doll of wood. That's the whole story. So he just lies. But if a person, an individual, someone with a heart and a soul decides to use tricky tricks, influencing skills or play with boundaries, then there is the question of morality always. And Pippi Longstocking, she has these two figures with her. They always say, "Are you right, Pippi? Should you do that?" And they bring the morality in, and we get annoyed with that, but that's important. So what we see in a culture where we have limitless core values, and we have this obsession with economic growth. So then if we think about this quick lesson I gave about how anthropologists look at the world and how we shape cultures from values, behaviors, norms, and then the physical world, if we have an limitless value, what type of behavior do we appreciate? Well, the type of behavior constantly playing tricks with boundaries. And that's the trickster. So then the trickster becomes a hero, and the hero we make into a leader. And then we get trickster cultures. And it's fun. It's really fun. It's creative. You want to be with that. But the only thing is, if you think about a card deck, deck of cards, you play with that. There is always a trickster card in it. We call it the Joker. Itself, it can't do anything, but we want to have it because it's fun. But how many Jokers are there in the game? It's 2. It's not 20. And that's where we went wrong. So if we have too many tricksters, we get to what I tend to say, we have Jack Sparrows as CEO and Pinocchio as political leaders. And just imagine we would be there.
Yeah.
So what to do is to have honest conversation, speak truth to power. And don't be fooled by promises which are not true. And in our politics we call that populism, and they're big promises, and we kind of know it's not true, but it sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's there's this problem, let's scapegoat someone. That's an old human trick. We trick it, and then we say, yeah, because of all the refugees we don't have houses. It's bullshit, and we should call it. But it sounds so good for many people because then, that's the problem. I don't have to change. So we scapegoat, we have tricks, we have all kind of things we fool by. And with modern technology and internet and limitless AI, it becomes scary.
Yeah. A lot of the people in our community are working in some way to change narratives for the better. And you're right of the importance. If you want to improve the world in some way, you need to change the ranking system that people use to get on in life. It reminded me of our members will have heard me talk about this before, but during the the Prussian War of Liberation against Napoleon, the Prussian government in exile called on aristocrats to send in their gold and silver jewelry to fund the uprising. But they replaced the jewelry with jewelry made of iron with patriotic inscriptions in the jewelry. So overnight, no longer could you impress everyone with your gold and silver jewelry. If you wanted to look good at the party, you wanted to wear your Berlin iron with these patriotic inscriptions and show what you'd done. But we have such a complex world today. What would be your advice to people working with a narrative skills to try and improve the world through their organization, through their volunteering? How do we harness our discursive power wisely? And what can we do in the complexity of today's environment to encourage a healthier ranking system?
I think it's which story do you amplify and why? Do you believe in it yourself? Is it some truth? And has it some link to some form of reality? So again, if we feel that the metaphor of being lost in the woods, I used that in the book, like you say, in the last chapter. I went to the UK, to the South Downs, to learn from Tristan Gurley, who's a natural navigator, and he knows his way in nature without using a map or a compass or anything. What I learned is if we don't acknowledge that we're lost, we die. That's what happens when we're lost in nature. But it's very hard to acknowledge. So storytellers, they amplify the story that we live, and people will, share that. So if you're good at storytelling or good at packaging something or influencing others, it comes with huge responsibilities, always, but especially during times of change, because we are trying to find this new narrative, and it will be very helpful if it's grounded in reality and not in fiction. So marketing is great, but if it's far beyond the actual product, it's a lie, and we need to call it. So it's really very easy. We need to be sincere and honest and speak our truth, and we do that all in different ways. So very direct or indirect, or find your ways of communication styles. That's all fine, but some form of honesty. And I think at many places that's lacking at the moment.
I want to remind members that I don't have monopolistic rights on questions. So if anyone would like to raise their digital hand, really at any point, we can interweave questions from me and from the group. With the amount of uncertainty that we face today, is the problem that really we've learned to become managers, and what we need is leaders, and they're fundamentally different things. And what can we look to make the transition from management to leadership, if that's right?
Yeah, I think what we need to see is that I like to look at that from the lens of archetypes. So a manager is also, it's a function title, a job title, but it's also an archetype. So every one of us has some kind of management skills. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here now, online or listening because you organize something. But we really, really thought of managers as being so important in so many places, not just because they can organize stuff, but their archetypical role is to make sure that the standing order can continue. So what managers are there for, to make it very efficient, to organize things in an efficient way, also in making sure that we keep on doing what we already did. That's their role. Now, in many organizations, we have so many people occupied with doing what we already did in a very efficient way. And that is also linked to this constant need for profit and growth. And therefore why we needed to make it very efficient. So leaders, they do something different. They make sure that the community is fine. Good leaders do that. They make sure that, yes, there is profit, of course, but also that people are, are warmly welcomed and that everyone feels a part of things. That's what leaders do, that we look at the past, the present, and the future. And yes, there's management, we need to organize stuff, but it's way more than that. So yes, we need to shift in many places from management to leadership, plus have the shaman or the magician in place to make sure that we can deal with all the different imaginations and how we can deal with that. We need some artists in the mix as well, so they can help us create new language. And yes, we need managers because they organize stuff, but not too many, because they will be in the way of transformations, because it will always be chaotic and costly. So they'll probably say, nah, it's not efficient to do it that way.
Yeah, because management is almost by definition the replication of the prior story rather than
Yes.
I want to go to a couple of our members.
So I have two quick questions. The first question is, would you agree that collaborative leadership gives us the best possible opportunity for cultural change, because we're sourcing wisdom in the room, we're also breaking norms because we're inviting more voices at the table. We're also trying to enter a new paradigm where, wisdom of the crowds. If you have one single leader, usually, unless they're real mavericks or real change agents, you're going to get a lot of the same thing being repeated over and over again. Whereas if you really truly embrace the collaborative culture with equity as its foundations and what have you, then you've really got that chance of engendering a whole new way of working and inviting new approaches that allow for that emergence that you were talking about from those liminal spaces.
Yes, I would agree. That's one of the other books I wrote is called Deep Democracy, which says it. So yes, I'm deeply involved in that. So we need to listen to all voices. If not, minority voices will go sabotage the whole thing, and meaning that we lose our wisdom. So there will be needs of inclusion, listening to everyone. And if not, there might be process of polarization because people will shout until they've been listened to.
Yeah.
Having said that,
or check out.
Or check out, which is sabotage as well, because they don't no longer give their wisdom to the group. But having said that, the other thing is, and that's, I think, where we need to balance. If you would make a comedy show and you would do that deep democratic, so constantly collaborating, then it will probably be a very rubbish show, because we cut off all the edges. So there is something with innovation. If we ask what we want in a constant collaborative environment, it might be that we how do you say that we
dampen
down the innovation. So we at the same time need this trickster energy, or someone who's saying, okay, regardless, I'll do that, and that we say we'll back you up. There we go.
The edge walkers,
yeah. So, but they need to be clear that they need to make sure that, and that's the balance. And I tend to call that the balance of power and love. So the balance of power, where you put dopamine in the system, and you put you really, it's a torch you carry. This is what you do. And then there's moments where you put the torches together, and then you have a campfire, and that's where you collaborate and see and feel and listen. And there needs to be a balance. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Thanks. And just the other one was around you're discussing of liminal spaces, because it's not in my own kind of lexicon that much, but I'm just wondering if it's kind of connected to the whole idea of presencing and the theory U model of downloading and allowing everything that's gone to really just be put to one side to see what wants to emerge. Are you looking at the liminal space really in the kind of suspension and presencing to allow for that emergent space? Would you say that's the similar?
It's similar, it's linked to it. So
Okay.
if I use liminality, it's really coined by Van Gennep, early 1900s, and Victor Turner and other anthropologists in the 60s took it forward. And you notice in their different spaces and phrases, we use different languages, but it's theory it's emerging, it's presencing,
Okay,
but a
great.
shaman in the jungle wouldn't call it that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And thanks for great questions, Paul.
Thank you, Catherine. And great to have your expertise always on collaboration and partnerships. Speaking of shamans, Neil?
Thank you. As you can see, Sainsbury's has arrived. Anyway, the thing that prompted me is that very early in the conversation, you spoke about kind of when you say something, it becomes the truth. Which I was interested about because I was thinking about Rory Sutherland's kind of marketing economics, where he was on the challenging the difference between right and wrong and the ability to just have a thought. And when does, and because I think there's so much of a challenge that our culture has truths, right or wrongs, black or whites, when we almost need to be more comfortable about having a thought. And I was just interested to your thinking on that one. And just one thing to add on to I also kind of was hearing Matthew McConaughey in my head going, "Life's a verb." It's something I got from The Green Light when it was all about kind of being in the present, being kind of understanding that you've got to engage the process because there is no destination, and we've got to experience that. As he says in his Texan accent, "Life's a verb, man." And anyway, sorry, but the question about thoughts and truths really is kind of what is the difference between a thought and a truth, and when does a thought become a truth?
That's a big question. Well, first of all, when I said if you call it, then it becomes true in the way that if we are in a relationship and I say, I don't really like how things are going, and then the next day I say, no, that was a joke. No, I already phrased that, so it's part of our reality. So that's what I meant by that. And then we can still quarrel about, So the thing is that in our cultures, in our minds, you could say that everything just is. So every behavior in this world just is. It's not good or bad in itself. We create that norms together. So hitting someone in the face is not always bad behavior. Sometimes it's good. When you're in a boxing ring, or and parents hitting their kids. In my country, it's forbidden by law. But it's always big discussions. Teachers hitting kids. No, that's really forbidden. But everyone experiences it. Most of this when we're, in history. So there's always a discussion. And what is then true and false? And that's almost like you decide upon this is what we believe in. So that's how you can look at that. At the same time, we're entering now a very philosophical, deep state where we could, discuss for hours around what is the truth and what's not. Truth is a dangerous concept. That's for one. That's why we circle around it many times. We like nice usually, and we like truth that back up our story and not the ones who contradict it. What I like about thinking about the truth is you could say there's different types of truth. And Glenda, and I forgot her last name, she's in systemic work. She beautifully said we have objective truth, which is data driven. You kind of objectively can say scientifically this is true or not. This is the data, the facts. Even though you can say there's some subjectivity in it, but still there's data. And then there's normative truth. You could say that in terms of climate change, that could be a normative truth, saying if it's better or good, but there's data backing it. There's objective truth, there's normative truth, what we as group decide what we believe, and there's subjective truth, what I as a person experience. And then the complex reality is the combination of those. And so we can talk around that and see. So if we're lost in the woods, what is the truth? Now, we're not really lost. I don't feel lost, but you are. Is it bad? No, it's good. So there's a whole discussion around the truth and thoughts. And one thing is I believe is that, if we go through transformation, that's all up for discussion more than in a phase where we kind of, we continue our journey. But when it's true change, then we suddenly look at all the things around us and challenge it. Then the obvious get challenged way more. Well, that's one answer.
No, thank you. I mean, I guess kind of, we all, the truths that we think of can sometimes be, ones that make us feel happier. Like this morning, I was having a difficult morning. I opened the bathroom window, and this robin came and kind of hovered by the gutter and kind of stayed there for a moment. Somebody had told me that when robins visit you, they're like a dead relative coming back to kind of that. Now, I know that that's an element that, it's, 99.9% likely that that's not true. But in that moment of when I was feeling a little bit, it gave me comfort. So it's kind of how interesting the truths we cling to are the ones that, help us through.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share a reaction, so it might not be a question. Well, I find the concept of a trickster quite comforting because it means it's not this overwhelming devil that you can't act. So I'm thinking, I don't know if you've come across Nigel Farage, but he leads the far right here. And if you see him as a trickster, it diminishes his power. And I just wanted to share something that's going to happen in Britain, which is a result of him and the far right. In May, there's going to be a week called A Million Acts of Hope, when we celebrate communities and we say Britain is not broken. There's plenty of people doing good stuff with their neighbours, and there'll be a big campaign for 1,000,000 Acts of Hope. And we wouldn't have celebrated ourselves without the tricksters. So I just wanted to say thank you. That is so helpful.
That's wonderful. Yes, and you're right. Those type of leaders, they use so many trickster tricks, and they will continue doing that because they've been doing that for the whole of humanity. It's part of us being human beings, but the trick is not to fall for it. So that's where we have lots of power. So tricksters are just helping us to see sharp what's important, as long as we have the courage to live by that, and knowing that at this moment we do have on a global scale leaders who use tricksters tricks to the max, fueled by AI tooling and the internet and limitless money playing, and then the big tech, and they're not doing that. They also have a narrative, and in that narrative they believe that empathy is a sin, and which is spread by women. So I don't know how many women on this call, but we're all to blame for all this empathy floating around the world. So if we just stop, then there will be strong leadership again, and that's the manosphere, and that's deeply rooted. So tricksters, they don't just play; they have a playbook, and if you don't like the book, then make sure at least to read another one or share different stories. So push a different story next to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jitske. It's been really interesting. And as it happens, 2 days ago, I finished Gillian Tett's book, Anthrovision. So I was quite interested to kind of stay on the anthropological topic. And one of the things that had caught my attention in Gillian's book, which she says was an anthropological term, is the creation myth, particularly around businesses. And she gave a couple of examples and sectors and things like that. So she talked about the derivatives financial creation myth, when it was what caused the financial crash in 2008, being that it was all about liquidity, that what they did made liquidity easier, and that was all beneficial, and kind of they were really bought into that myth. And we've seen creation myths around some of the businesses, and there's an AI creation myth and all the rest of it. But when it comes to growth, and I think for me this kind of that we can't we in the Western world can't let go of this idea that we have to have economic growth. That seems to me to be the main challenge that we have to find a way around. And I guess when I started questioning that, years ago, it seemed that the creation myth, if you like, was that, there was trickle down benefits from economic growth. But surely we can all see that's a lie. That doesn't happen. So do you see that there's a different kind of creation myth around growth that we could somehow unpick?
Well, I don't know. I think it's finding new ways. And to me, that's one of the searches I had writing this book. What would then be a different narrative?
Mm,
And I just got to the understanding that I don't know. So there's people saying we need degrowth, and there's people saying
mm,
we need more sustainability, and there's people saying, and I got, deeply realized that I don't have the knowledge to decide. So I have to put my trust in people who say that will be the right thing. Then people say, well, we need to trust in technology and innovation, and that will save us. And then even up to the point that will make us better people, and then transhuman and eugenetics, and you get in all that whole field of where are we going and growing, and how do we do that? And for me personally, I don't know. And as an anthropologist, I don't know the route. I don't know where to go. I have kind of my personal preferences, but from my professional role, I have no idea.
mm,
The only thing I do is describe the process. So when human beings go through those kind of transformations and we realize that our core narrative doesn't fit anymore, then we know there will be chaos in power, because people
mm,
will start fighting each other, and there will be shifts in power, and the ones who are holding the power and the definition power, they will cling on to it and they will fight each other. And if we don't listen to all voices, we get polarization processes. And as long as we battle with that, if it's not a true problem, it will go away and we have much ado about nothing. But if it's a true problem, then it will stay with us until we change the core narrative. And then
mm.
we know that civilizations come and go. So depending on
Yeah.
how well we deal with that. So we have chaos in power, we have trickster tricks, we have all kind of wild stories, and that's where we're at, I think.
Yeah, I guess my question was more about the core narrative around, that economic growth is essential. I guess it was kind of, are you seeing a story that goes with that people are buying into? Because I was thinking that the story used to be that, it benefits everybody because it trickles down, but surely we all know that's not true. So do you see a different appealing core narrative that lots of people are still buying into? Why are we clinging to this idea that we can't move away from infinite growth? What's what's
Yeah,
what's keeping us stuck in that story?
I see, and maybe you experience as well different storylines. So like degrowth or people finding new ways, but they're more in the minority than the fringes. And when I talk with politicians and C-levels and people, and high power positions, they still believe in the story. So I would
Mm,
challenge the assumption that everyone doesn't, know.
mm,
I was at
okay.
a meeting where in the Netherlands, high-level officials and politicians were present, and that they were saying the solution is that we got to believe in ourselves and our VOC mentality, which is us Dutch conquering the world and killing people. That's so still, if we make it stronger, then we'll battle and we'll win, and we find new technology and new ways of energy. We don't have to deal with the ways we do. So
Technology will save us. Okay.
yeah, we'll save us.
Yeah.
And I get to the point. Well, so personally, as a person, I say I'm not sure. It's like maybe, but I don't know. So as an anthropologist, I just look at the process and say, okay, this is what's happening. And I do see different people believing in different small storylines, and some are picking up and some are staying in small containers. So the main thing is, if you look at the change we need, that's why many people call it systemic change. We need systemic change. And in how I see it, systemic change is the same as culture change. So culture change meaning that, okay, what's our narrative? What's our values? Does it still, fit with the world we need? And therefore we need a different narrative, but not just in our minds and not just for others, but for ourselves as well. So are you willing to look at your own life and privileges and change that? So knowing that eating meat is pretty damaging for the world, how many of us are limiting our consumption of meat? And knowing that flying, and how many of us do that? And if you balance that, are you then a bad person or a hypocrite if you still fly or not? Can you still do that? So that's are the moral discussions we need to have. And in every conversation, we'll exchange ideas, and we change them in every decision we make. And that's what people shape cultures through interaction and decision making. And in doing that, we create new storylines and we build upon that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we might fight each other on it as well.
It has been such a beautiful conversation for us. It's good. I still have so many questions, so I hope we get to have conversations another day. One of the concepts I liked in your book was the anthropological concept of matter out of place. The difference between a weed and a flower isn't a literal thing. It's just a flower is something you want in your garden, and a weed is something that you don't. And I wonder, with regards to maybe what a future book of yours, how we're going to make sure that humans don't become matter out of place in an age of AI. So there's so much for us to work through with you. I know you think very highly of the idea of campfire conversations, and I hope that we get something close to what you might describe as a campfire conversation here at MarketingKind. We've definitely, I've enjoyed the journey of our conversation, both for its own sake and for the possibilities it can open up for us. So I very much also wish you in return safe travels. A couple of notes for our members for forthcoming campfire conversations. We have a Your Marketing Kind with our own member, Jaja Smith, on brand design for social change on March 19th. We have our next digital fireside is on quiet leadership with the author of The Unseen Leader, Martin Gutman, who was also at the same conference in Lithuania that I mentioned at the start, and that will be on April 16th. And our next exchange will be with the leading economist, Sir John Kay, on May 5th. So that will be something very special to look forward to as well. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Jitske, so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and bringing all of that anthropological insight into a place that very much needs it.
Thank you so much. And for all of you, safe travels, and see you along the way, somewhere, someplace, sometime.